The plane was preparing for takeoff, and passengers slowly made their way to their seats. Inside the first-class cabin, soft lighting reflected off the premium leather seats. A quiet, luxurious atmosphere enveloped the space, a place not everyone had the privilege to enter. Ethan Carter reached his seat by the window. He took a deep breath, trying to ignore the subtle glances cast his way. He knew them well. They weren't glances of curiosity, but of silent questioning. A black man like him wasn't often seen in a place like this. Not because he didn't belong, but because he had to fight twice as hard to be here. But he didn't care. He didn't have time to care. This flight was taking him to an important meeting, one that could change the course of his career. Everything was falling into place. Ethan slid his leather backpack under the seat and opened the book he had been reading. But just as he flipped the page, a soft voice came from the aisle. "Excuse me." He looked up. Standing before him was a young woman, her face pale with exhaustion. One hand gripped the back of a seat for support, while the other rested on her stomach. She was pregnant. Beside her stood a man, likely her husband, his face filled with worry, as if he was internally battling with a decision. Ethan frowned slightly. She wasn't supposed to be in this cabin, and then he understood. They were looking for a better seat. Around them, the other passengers cast quick glances their way, but no one moved. Some buried their faces in their phones, others looked away, pretending as if ignoring the situation would make it disappear. No one said a word. No one offered a seat. The woman stood there, her breathing heavy. A long flight ahead would be grueling for her. Ethan looked down at his seat, the expensive, comfortable seat he had rightfully paid for. The seat he was supposed to enjoy. He could ignore them just like everyone else. No one was forcing him to do anything, but before he could second-guess himself, he stood up. A moment of silence spread through the cabin. The subtle gazes of others sharpened, sensing something unusual. He gently tapped the woman's shoulder and offered a kind smile. "Ma'am, please take my seat. You'll be much more comfortable here." Her eyes widened in shock. Her husband blinked as if unable to believe what was happening. "No, I can't. Ethan gave her a reassuring nod. "You need it more than I do." A few seconds later, she lowered herself into the seat, tears glistening in her eyes. Her husband whispered a heartfelt "thank you," the gratitude evident in his gaze. Ethan grabbed his backpack and made his way toward the economy cabin. He expected nothing, no applause, no recognition. He was simply doing what felt right. What he didn't know was, this one small decision would change his life forever. Ethan walked down the cramped aisle of the economy cabin, his backpack slung over one shoulder, feeling the curious glances as he passed. This section of the plane was a stark contrast to the tranquility of first class, filled with chatter, the occasional cries of restless children, and seats so close together that even shifting slightly felt restrictive. His new seat was near the back of the plane, a dreaded middle seat. The two men sitting on either side of him were broad-shouldered, taking up most of the armrest space. Ethan exhaled quietly, tucking his backpack under the seat, trying to make himself as small as possible. But he didn't mind. It was just a few hours. He had been through worse. The last time he flew first class, he still remembered the stares, the unspoken judgments. No one had to say it, but he knew what they were thinking. He wasn't the kind of person they expected to see there. But that didn't matter. He had worked tirelessly to earn his place in rooms that had once been closed off to him. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, leaning his head back against the seat, and in his mind, he saw his mother. The woman who had always believed in him, even when the world did not. She had worked tirelessly to raise him alone. As a child, he remembered hearing her whisper late at night, praying that her son wouldn't be broken by the world, that no matter how cruel life became, he would hold on to his kindness and strength. Maybe that was why, without hesitation, he gave up his seat to Claire. The plane rumbled down the runway, engines roaring beneath him. Ethan opened his eyes, glancing out the window as the deep blue sky stretched endlessly before them. What he didn't know yet was that his journey had only just begun. Ethan had no idea that a simple act of kindness would soon open the door to a story far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. The plane had stabilized at cruising altitude, the steady hum of the engines blending into the background like a distant whisper. Ethan sat still, trying to focus on the book in his hands, but his mind kept drifting back to first class, the place he had just left behind. He wasn't the kind of person who sought recognition. He didn't need applause or praise for what he had done. But there was something about Claire that made it impossible to ignore. He had seen the exhaustion in her eyes, the hidden worry behind Ryan's forced smile. He had seen this look too many times before. The way people silently endured, afraid to speak up, afraid to be a burden. A flight attendant passed by and paused beside him. "Would you like something to drink, sir?" "Just a water, thank you." She smiled, poured him a glass, and continued down the aisle. Ethan picked up the glass, but before he could take a sip, a voice from the front of the cabin caught his attention. "Ma'am, are you okay?" His head snapped up. A flight attendant was standing beside Claire, her expression filled with concern. Ethan couldn't see clearly from where he was sitting, but a wave of unease washed over him. And then, the crackling voice of the intercom echoed through the cabin. "Is there a doctor on board? We need medical assistance." Ethan's chest tightened. Something was wrong. He looked ahead, seeing Ryan gripping his wife's hand, his face pale. Claire leaned back against the seat, her eyes closed, one hand resting on her stomach, her breathing labored. A doctor on board quickly rushed over, kneeling beside her to assess the situation. The other passengers began murmuring, turning to look, curious but hesitant to speak up. Ethan clenched his water glass, his palm suddenly damp with sweat. He barely knew Claire, knew nothing about her aside from their brief interaction. But an overwhelming sense of worry flooded through him. Was she going to be okay? The flight still had hours before landing. Would she make it? And more than that, if he hadn't given up his seat, if she had been forced to sit cramped in economy, what would have happened? He swallowed hard, waiting for the doctor's verdict, as the unease in his chest grew tighter. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing the plane's descent. Inside the cabin, the tension from earlier had settled, replaced by a quieter, more subdued atmosphere. Ethan still couldn't see Claire from his seat, but he could sense the unusual silence from first class. Was she okay? Throughout the flight, attendants had frequently checked on her. Every time they passed by, Ethan had the urge to ask, but each time, he stopped himself. He had no reason to be so invested. He was just a stranger, just another passenger on this flight. But something inside him wouldn't let it go. As the plane touched down and the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers stood up, grabbing their bags and shuffling toward the exit. Ethan swung his backpack over his shoulder and stepped into the slow-moving line of people leaving the economy cabin. Just as he stepped off the plane, a familiar voice called out behind him. "Ethan," he turned. Ryan was standing there. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were filled with gratitude. Before Ethan could even respond, Ryan stepped forward and extended his hand. "Thank you. Really, thank you." Ethan shook his hand, giving him a nod. "Is she okay?" Ryan exhaled, relief breaking through his tired features. "She's still a little weak, but she's okay. If she hadn't had that first-class seat, I don't know how she would have made it through the flight." Ethan felt the tension in his chest ease, the lingering worry beginning to fade. Ryan turned and gestured toward someone. Standing a few feet away, Claire was watching them. Claire looked exhausted, but her smile was genuine. Dark circles still shadowed her eyes, but there was something in her gaze that made Ethan feel warm. Slowly, she stepped closer and looked at him. "I don't even know how to thank you." Ethan shook his head. "It's nothing. I just did what anyone would do." She let out a soft chuckle. "No, that's not true. If you saw what I saw, how everyone just stayed silent, pretending not to notice, you'd understand just how different you are." Ethan didn't respond. Ryan, however, jumped in, his tone more animated. "We'd love to take you out for dinner, just a small meal to thank you properly." Ethan hesitated. He didn't know them. He had a packed schedule. Tomorrow he had an important meeting, one that could change the course of his career. But for some reason, he didn't want to say no. He looked at Ryan, then at Claire, and finally he nodded. "All right, but I'm picking the restaurant." Ryan laughed. "Deal." They left the airport together, unaware that this simple dinner would change their lives forever. The restaurant was tucked into a quiet street corner, not overly fancy, but warm and inviting. Soft golden light cast a glow against exposed brick walls, giving giving the space a cozy, intimate feel. It was the perfect place to unwind after a long flight. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from Claire and Ryan. They ordered their food and exchanged small talk, work, favorite travel destinations, a few funny stories from past flights. The conversation was easy, relaxed. The tension from the flight had faded. But as they talked, Ethan noticed something. Ryan kept glancing at Claire as if waiting for her to say something. And Claire, she seemed distracted. Her fingers traced the rim of her glass, her eyes darting down as if lost in thought. There was something more beneath the surface of this dinner. A few moments passed in silence before Claire finally looked up, hesitation in her eyes. "Ethan, I know this might sound strange, but we need your help with something." Ethan raised an eyebrow and set his chopsticks down. "Help with what?" Ryan took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "Can you keep a secret?" The question only made Ethan more intrigued. He nodded. "Of course." Claire bit her lip, then lowered her voice. "It's about my father. He just passed away, and I think something isn't right." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Ryan spoke this time, his tone more serious. Her father owned an import-export business. On paper, everything looked legitimate, but after he passed, Claire started finding inconsistencies in the financial records. Claire nodded, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Money was withdrawn without clear explanations, large amounts being funneled into accounts from unknown sources, and most importantly, one name keeps showing up over and over again in the records. She paused. Then, almost as if saying it out loud made it more real, she finally said the name. Clyde Harrington. The name rang like an alarm in Ethan's head. Clyde Harrington. Claire continued, her voice quieter. "I tried asking my father's lawyer, but he claimed he didn't know anything. I reached out to some of the company's former employees, but they all avoided my questions." Ryan leaned forward, his voice steady. "We think someone was manipulating her father's finances. Maybe it was Clyde. Maybe it was someone inside the company. But we don't know where to start. Claire found out you're a data analyst, and we thought, if anyone can help us figure this out, it's you." Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling the warmth from the overhead lights pressing down on him. He had come here for a simple thank you dinner. But now, he was listening to a story about shady financial records, a recently deceased businessman, and a mysterious name that kept appearing in the books. He could walk away. He owed them nothing. But there was something in Claire's eyes that made it impossible to turn away. It wasn't just curiosity, it was genuine fear. She was scared. Ethan sat in silence for a moment, then finally, he spoke. "Send me the files. I'll take a look." Claire exhaled, as if she had been holding her breath this entire time. "Thank you, Ethan." Ryan smiled, giving Ethan a light pat on the shoulder. "Really, man? Thank you." Ethan nodded, but deep down, he knew this wasn't going to be simple. He had no idea what he was stepping into, but his instincts told him this was only the beginning. Ethan sat in his hotel room, the dim blue light from his laptop screen casting shadows across his face. The clock on the wall read close to midnight, but he didn't care. He was more caught up in this than he had anticipated. On the screen in front of him were rows upon rows of numbers, accounting records, bank statements, import-export contracts. Claire had sent everything she had. At first glance, it all looked legitimate. But as he dug deeper, the cracks began to show. Large sums of money had been funneled into the company, with no invoices attached. Some accounts showed money flowing in and out, only to disappear without a trace. And then, there it was again. Clyde Harrington. Someone was hiding something. Ethan traced the money trails, cross-referencing transactions, searching for a pattern. And then he found it. 2 separate transactions, identical in amount, processed at the exact same time. He widened the screen, comparing the records side by side. One of them was fake. Someone had deliberately altered the records to cover up fraudulent activity. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. This wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. This was fraud. He took screenshots documenting every anomaly and then reached for his phone. "Ethan, I found something. We need to talk." A few seconds later, his phone vibrated. "Ryan, we have something important to tell you too. Meet us tomorrow morning." Ethan frowned. Something important? There was something about Ryan's message that unsettled him. He set his phone down and took a deep breath. He had just started digging, but it already felt like someone didn't want the truth to come out. The next morning, Ethan met Claire and Ryan at a quiet cafe. Claire looked exhausted, but the determination in her eyes made it clear she wasn't backing down. Ryan slid a plain envelope across the table. "This showed up at our house this morning." Ethan raised an eyebrow and picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of white paper with just one typed sentence: "Stop now while you still can." A chill ran through Ethan's veins. "Who sent this?" he asked, his voice steady. Ryan shook his head. "No postmark. Someone hand-delivered it to our mailbox." Claire gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "They're warning us." Ethan looked at them, then down at the note, thoughts racing. Someone knew they were investigating, and they wanted them to stop. Slowly, he folded the paper and placed it back on the table. "This means we're on the right track." Claire swallowed hard. Ryan took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. "The question is, do we keep going?" Ethan glanced at them, then at his laptop, still filled with the evidence he had uncovered the night before. The easy choice was to walk away, to let this go. But Ethan had never been the kind of person to turn his back when someone needed help. He looked up, meeting their eyes. "We keep going." He had no idea that this decision would change everything. Ethan's decision cut through the tension in the cafe like a knife. No one spoke for a few seconds, but Claire and Ryan's eyes said everything. They knew they were stepping into dangerous territory, but they also knew they couldn't turn back. Ryan leaned in, lowering his voice. "We have a new lead." He pulled out an old document Claire had found in her father's files, a contract between her father's company and a business named Harrington Global Logistics. Clyde Harrington. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, trying to connect the dots. All the irregular financial transactions he had uncovered could be linked to this company. "Does this company actually exist?" Ethan asked, flipping through the pages, analyzing every detail. Claire shook her head slightly. "It only exists on paper. No official headquarters, no listed address." Ryan pulled out his phone and scrolled through a few images. "But we found a warehouse address, one Claire's father had dealings with." Ethan stared at the screen. It was an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of the city. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary, but something in his gut told him this place held the answers they were looking for. He set his coffee down, eyes still fixed on the address. "We need to check it out." Claire hesitated. "You mean right now?" Ethan nodded. "We can't wait. If someone already sent you a warning, that means they know we're looking." Ryan clenched his jaw, clearly uneasy. But after a long exhale, he pushed back from the table and stood. "All right, but if anything seems off, we leave immediately." Ethan glanced at Claire. She was silent for a second, then nodded. They were in too deep to stop now. Less than an hour later, Ryan's car rolled to a stop in front of a towering metal gate. From the outside, it looked like a normal business operation, a massive warehouse surrounded by shipping containers, the occasional truck moving in and out. But something wasn't right. Ethan could feel it. He scanned the area. No company signage, no visible employees. Just one man standing near the entrance, dressed in a black leather jacket, hands shoved into his pockets. He wasn't working. He was watching. Ryan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he silently pushed the car door open. Ryan and Claire exchanged a glance before following his lead. "We're not going inside," Ethan said, his voice low. "Just taking a look, seeing if there's anything suspicious. If anyone asks, we say we're looking for a misplaced delivery address." The three of them walked toward the gate, keeping their composure. But as they approached, the man in the leather jacket turned to face them. His stare was cold, not welcoming. "What are you doing here?" His voice was rough, laced with suspicion. Ryan stepped forward, keeping his tone casual. "Sorry, I think my father might have done business with this company. We just wanted to." "There's no company here." The man cut him off, his voice sharp, final. "You should leave." Ethan felt the muscles in his shoulders tense. He knew they weren't here by accident. He knew they were searching for something. And more importantly, he didn't want them to find it. Ethan took a step closer, meeting the man's gaze head-on. "We just need to know if this was a location Clyde Harrington used." A flicker of something dangerous flashed in the man's eyes. "I don't know who that is." Then, after a beat, his voice dropped lower. "But you've got two options. Either turn around and drive away now, or I'll make a call and have someone escort you out." Ethan wasn't the type to be easily intimidated. But he wasn't reckless either. This man wasn't bluffing. He stole a quick glance at Ryan and Claire. It was time to leave. "All right," Ethan said, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "We're leaving." They turned around and walked back toward the car. Ethan could feel the man's stare burning into their backs like a predator watching its prey. As soon as the car pulled away from the warehouse, Ryan gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Shit, he knows. He knows we're looking." Ethan checked the rearview mirror. The warehouse shrank in the distance, but the uneasy feeling of being watched didn't fade. He glanced at Claire. She said nothing, but her hands were clenched around her phone, her fingers white from the pressure. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Ethan, we just opened a door we weren't supposed to open." And just as she finished speaking, Ryan's phone rang. He answered it, but the moment he put it to his ear, his expression changed. No one needed to ask. The sharp breath he took, the way his face drained of color, said everything. Claire leaned forward. "Ryan, who is it?" Slowly, he lowered the phone, his voice shaking. No one spoke. It was an automated message. A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine. "What did it say?" Ryan swallowed hard. "Stop now, or the next person won't just get a warning." No one breathed. A warning. But this time it wasn't just an anonymous note. This time they were facing something real. Inside the car, silence stretched thick and heavy. Ryan gripped the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead, but it was clear his mind was racing. Claire sat still, hands clenched together in her lap as if trying to steady herself. Ethan sat in the back, staring at his phone. The message from the unknown number still glowed on the screen. "Stop now, or the next person won't just get a warning." Each word felt like a hammer striking into their thoughts. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "What do we do?" His voice was hoarse, as if the weight of the situation had settled in his throat. Ethan tightened his grip on his phone. He wasn't the kind of person who walked away from a fight, but this time it was clear they were up against something far bigger than they had imagined. "We need to find out who Clyde Harrington really is," Ethan said, his voice low and firm, his gaze locked on the screen. "And more importantly, we need to figure out what Claire's father was involved in." Claire exhaled, exhaustion clouding her expression. "But how? This isn't the kind of guy we can just Google," Ethan nodded. "But your father is." Ryan flicked his eyes toward the rearview mirror, watching Ethan. "What do you mean?" Ethan tapped into a corporate records database, typing in Jonathan Mitchell, Claire's father. A long list of businesses appeared under his name, but one company made Ethan's heart pound. J. Mitchell and Harrington Exports. Ryan and Claire leaned forward, staring at the screen. "My dad and Clyde were business partners?" Claire murmured in disbelief. "But he never once mentioned this." Ethan scrolled down, his eyes locking onto a small line of text beneath the company profile. "Dissolved last year. Reason, internal dispute." He looked up at Claire. "Clyde wasn't just doing business with your father. They were partners." The air inside the car grew heavier. If Clyde had once been Claire's father's business partner, and their company dissolved due to a dispute, was it possible that her father had uncovered something he wasn't supposed to know? Ryan took a deep breath. "We need to talk to someone who actually knows what happened, someone who was there before everything fell apart." Claire turned to Ethan, and he already knew who they were both thinking of. Ronald Benson. Ronald Benson was in his 60s, with tired eyes that still held the sharpness of someone who had seen too much. He lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, once a family home, now just a place filled with dust-covered photo frames and memories too heavy to carry. He studied Claire for a long moment as they stepped inside. Then, he let out a weary sigh. "You look just like your mother." Claire hesitated. "I didn't think you knew my father." Ronald let out a dry chuckle. But there was no amusement in his eyes. "You're wrong. I didn't just know him. I helped him build everything." Ethan could feel the weight in his words. Ronald hadn't just known Claire's father, he had been part of it. Ryan was the first to speak. "We need to know about Clyde Harrington. Can you tell us anything?" Ronald sighed, rubbing his temples as if debating whether he should say more. Then he looked up, locking eyes with Claire. Clyde Harrington is a devil in a businessman's suit. The room fell into silence. Ronald took a slow breath before continuing. When your father and Clyde started their export business, everything was legal. They shipped goods internationally, made good money. But Clyde, he was never satisfied with ordinary profits. He paused, his gaze distant, as if remembering something he wished he could forget. I don't know exactly when things changed, but one day I realized the company wasn't just exporting legal goods anymore. There were shipments with no documentation, no invoices, and then large sums of money started disappearing. A cold sensation crept down Ethan's spine. What do you think it was? Ronald's voice turned rough. Smuggling. Could have been weapons, could have been something worse. But I know one thing for sure. Your father, Claire, figured it out. Claire clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palm. He never told me. Why? Ronald shook his head. Because he was scared, and he had every reason to be. He wanted out, but Clyde doesn't let people walk away that easily. He had a rule. If you leave, you pay the price. No one spoke for a few moments. And then a terrible thought crossed Ethan's mind. He turned to Ronald, his voice slow but firm. Do you think Clyde had something to do with Claire's father's death? Ronald met his gaze, his aged eyes filled with a cold, unwavering truth. What do you think? Claire's stomach dropped. She shook her head, whispering as if trying to convince herself. No way, he died of a heart attack. Ronald let out a slow breath. Maybe, but when a man is about to expose people like Clyde, sometimes death comes at just the right time. Silence. Then, Claire's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. An unknown number. She hesitated before answering, lifting the phone to her ear. Hello? No response, just a slow, steady breath on the other end. She was about to hang up when suddenly a low, gravelly voice cut through the silence. I warned you. The call ended. The room fell into absolute stillness, and then Ethan shot to his feet. We're running out of time. No one in the room spoke. Claire still clutched her phone, her breath uneven. That voice, cold, hollow, and full of menace. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a declaration of war. Ryan immediately pulled out his phone. We need to call the police. Before he could dial, Ethan grabbed his wrist. Wait. Ryan turned sharply, eyes blazing. Wait? What the hell are you waiting for? Someone is watching us. Claire was just directly threatened. Ethan knew Ryan was furious, and he understood why. But deep down, his instincts told him that calling the cops wouldn't solve this. He turned to Ronald, who had been silently observing, his expression unreadable. What do you think? Ethan asked. Ronald leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily. Clyde isn't the kind of man who sends empty threats. If he's watching you, then he already has a plan. Ethan clenched his jaw. So what do we do? Just sit around and wait for him to make a move. Ronald smirked, but there was no humor in it. No, but if you want to survive this, you need to be smart. Ethan locked eyes with him. What do you mean? Ronald slowly leaned forward, reaching under the table. He pulled out a small wooden box, carefully lifting the lid. Inside was an old key. He placed it on the table. I still have some of your father's files, Claire. His voice was firm, but there was a trace of regret. Before he died, he sent me a set of documents. He must have suspected Clyde for a long time. Claire's eyes widened. Why didn't you give them to me sooner? Ronald shook his head. Because I was afraid. I've lost too many friends to things like this. But if your father tried to protect these papers, I won't let them be buried. Ethan picked up the key. It was ice cold in his palm. Where are they? Ronald met his gaze. An old storage unit outside of town. That's where I hid them. Ryan shot him a skeptical look. Are you sure no one else knows about this? Ronald shrugged. We're about to find out. Ethan gripped the key, its icy surface sending a chill through his palm. Then let's get those documents now. Ronald nodded. There's an old storage unit outside the city. That's where they're hidden. Ryan shot him a skeptical look. Are you sure no one else knows about this? Ronald shrugged. We're about to find out. Claire shivered, instinctively stepping closer behind Ryan. Then Clyde stepped into the room. His cold gaze swept over them before settling on Ronald. Did you really think you could keep running, old man? Ronald tightened his grip on the metal box, saying nothing. Ethan stepped forward. He's not running, but you still can. Clyde smirked. You think I came alone? Before Ethan could react, 2 more men stepped in behind him, both armed. Ethan gritted his teeth. Shit. They had walked right into a trap. Ryan instinctively pulled Claire closer. Whatever you want, take it, but don't touch my wife. Clyde sneered. I don't want your wife. I just want the box. Ronald clutched the metal case tighter, his hands steady despite the danger. You'll never get it. Clyde gave a small nod. One of his men stepped forward, reaching to yank the box from Ronald's grasp. Hunk! A blaring car horn sliced through the tension. Then, the unmistakable sound of sirens. Police. Clyde's head snapped toward the door. Damn it. Ryan didn't hesitate. He lunged, landing a solid punch on the nearest thug. The man stumbled back, giving Ethan just enough time to slam into Clyde, tackling him to the ground. Red and blue lights flashed outside. Clyde's men hesitated, realizing their advantage had slipped away. Clyde glared at Ethan, seething. You have no idea what you just did, kid. Ethan, breathing hard, stared down at him. Oh, I do. I just helped put you away. The warehouse doors burst open. Police flooded in. Clyde Harrington barely had time to curse before officers pinned him down, handcuffing him. And in that moment, Ethan knew they had won. But this wasn't over. Because whatever was inside that metal box might be darker than anything they had imagined. Police sirens echoed through the industrial lot, red and blue lights flashing against the cold concrete walls. Clyde Harrington was shoved into the back of a police car, his face twisted in rage. Ethan stood nearby, breathing heavily, his pulse still racing with adrenaline. Claire clung to Ryan, still trembling. Ronald sat on the ground, clutching the metal box as if it held the most important secret in the world. A police officer approached, Detective John Mercer. A seasoned man in his 50s, his graying hair and sharp eyes carried the weight of too many unsolved cases. He scanned the scene before fixing his gaze on Ethan. Can someone explain what the hell just happened here? Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, exhaling. You can start with Clyde Harrington. I'm pretty sure his name isn't new to your files. Detective Mercer huffed. Not even close. He's been on our radar for years. But the bastard is smart, he has money, connections, and most importantly, he knows how to make things disappear. Ethan glanced at Ronald, who was still clutching the metal box. Maybe now we finally have the proof. They sat in the police interrogation room, the old metal box placed in the center of the table, as if it held every answer they had been searching for. Ronald's hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of old documents, several audio tapes, and a small hard drive. Claire flipped through the papers, her hands shaking as she read the contents. These are financial records. But this isn't just accounting fraud. Ryan frowned. Then what is it? Ethan leaned in, scanning the pages. A long list of names, massive amounts of money moving between offshore accounts, and secretive import transactions from overseas. Smuggling, Ethan muttered. But it's not just that. There's also... He flipped to the next page and froze. Human trafficking. The air in the room turned ice cold. Detective Mercer snatched the documents, scanning them quickly. His face darkened. Son of a bitch. Ronald clenched his fists. I suspected for a long time, but I never had proof. Now we do. Ethan swallowed hard. Claire's father discovered this, didn't he? Ronald nodded, his voice hoarse with emotion. Jonathan wasn't a perfect man, but he had a moral code. When he found out Clyde was using the company as a front for human trafficking, he tried to pull out, but Clyde wasn't going to let that happen. Claire covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ryan slammed his fist against the table. So he killed him? He made his death look like a heart attack? Ronald didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The truth was clear. Detective Mercer stood abruptly, grabbing the files. I'm taking this to the task force. If everything in here is what I think it is, Clyde isn't just going to prison for financial fraud. He's going away for life. Ethan turned to Claire. She was still trembling, but in her eyes there was something else. Determination. 2 days later, Clyde Harrington was formally charged with smuggling, money laundering, and connections to an international trafficking network. The story exploded across news outlets, one of the biggest scandals in international trade. Sitting in a small cafe near his hotel, Ethan scrolled through the latest headlines on his phone. Billionaire Clyde Harrington, arrested, faces life in prison. He exhaled slowly. They had done it. But just as relief began to set in, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Clyde wasn't the only one. You think this is over? Be careful, Ethan. His body tensed. A cold chill crept down his spine. Someone else was still out there. Clyde had fallen, but he wasn't the only one pulling the strings. Ethan tightened his grip on his phone. This wasn't over. 2 weeks after Clyde's arrest, the dust had finally started to settle. But for Claire, Ryan, Ethan, and Ronald, life would never be the same. They had torn back the curtain on a horrifying truth, faced a dangerous enemy, and most importantly, brought justice for Claire's father. But that didn't mean it was easy. Claire was still wrestling with the weight of her loss. Knowing her father had tried to do the right thing brought some peace, but the reality that he had been murdered by people he once trusted made the grief even sharper. One afternoon, she sat on her front porch, a warm cup of tea in her hands, her eyes distant as she gazed out at the small garden in front of her. Ethan pulled up a chair and sat down next to Claire. "Are you okay?" She gave a small smile, but her eyes remained distant. "I don't know, maybe. I never truly will be." Ethan nodded. He understood that feeling. There are things that can't be fixed, only learned to live with. "But you did it," he said. "You brought the truth to light. Your father would be proud." Claire took a deep breath. She knew he was right. She turned to him, her gaze a little warmer now. "And you? How has all of this changed you?" Ethan let out a soft chuckle. "I think I've learned something important." Claire tilted her head. "What is it?" He looked up at the endless blue sky, where the golden hues of sunset stretched across the horizon. "Sometimes, the smallest actions can change everything. I never thought giving up my seat on a plane would lead me here, but it did. When you needed help, I couldn't turn away. And now, I realize that I don't want to just exist. I want to make a difference." Claire smiled, a real, genuine smile this time. "You already have, Ethan." They sat there, basking in a rare moment of peace. The storm had passed, but more importantly, they had found hope amidst the wreckage. Ethan's story began with a simple act of kindness, a single choice born out of compassion. He never could have imagined that giving up a first-class seat for a pregnant woman would lead him into a dangerous journey, one filled with corruption, crime, and betrayal. But in the end, kindness prevailed. Claire found the truth about her father. Justice was served. And Ethan, he found a better version of himself. This story reminds us of an important truth. Sometimes the smallest actions have the greatest impact. A simple gesture, a moment of kindness, it can be the spark of hope for someone going through their darkest days. If this story made you think, hit like. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Aiva Stories, so you never miss an inspiring story. And share this video to spread the message, because the world can change, starting with the smallest of actions. Bookmark, go back. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.